FACE EPILOGUE. Excerpt read by the author. Men exist for the sake of one another. Marcus Aurelius. Chapter 2. Artifacts from interview number 2, Turning Point, Part 1. In the same way that the Federal Bureau of Investigation were in a race against time to find the dissolving bodies of the Watts children before all the evidence evaporated, Nichol Kessinger was in a race of her own. The race started before the murders, but the thing that changed after them was eerily similar to what it was before: staying ahead of the game. There were a few things Kessinger wanted to walk away with when everything was said and not so much done. Her job, for one. She wanted to hold on to that if at all possible. It was quid pro quo to an extent. She was in a difficult compromise situation, but if she was going to survive, she had to bargain with the only bargaining chip she had, the information they so desperately needed to get their man, the man who had once been her man. Only she could do that, but it was important that they knew that, and that they gave her assurances. If this is true, one wonders whether Kessinger needed similar assurances in terms of the affair. Was she trying to stay ahead of that game too? Affairs tend to work that way. The cheater needs to stay ahead to keep the game afoot. And in a game where there are charades and one player knows things and has a strategic advantage over another, to stay ahead they need assurances. Could Watts provide those assurances? What were they? That he would definitely move out? That the marriage was definitely over? That the baby wasn't his? That he loved her? That the divorce was being finalized? When the FBI handed over Kessinger to the CBI wanted assurances too. They wanted to be sure Kessinger was giving them usable intel on their suspect. The turning point didn't come during the first interview with the feds, which was neither here nor there, but the second, with CBI agent Kevin Kobach. We'll deal briefly with the first interview with the feds in the section dealing with resources. Let's begin now by looking at the turning point in the interrogation with Kessinger. The turning point happens when they start talking about Watts's identity. Kessinger describes him, as noted earlier, as an introvert. Kobach: who was Chris? Kessinger, loudly: I think he's an introvert. I would consider him to be like a pretty, I don't want to say he's a very reserved individual. I think he's probably more reserved around other people. Her voice has a sing-song quality at this point. If we go backwards a minute or two to contextualize this disclosure, Kobach has just asked Kessinger to describe what Watts has been like, what he said to her, and how they'd gotten to know each other over the past 8 weeks. Kessinger responds obstinately by arguing that there's no way she can remember exactly what Watts said, or exactly when he said it. It's not going to happen. She's argumentative. It feels like she's stalling, doesn't it? Bear in mind at this point Kessinger already knows it's a murder investigation because Kobach's told her. But even this isn't enough of an incentive to get her to disclose without being prompted all the time. When Kobach refers to 8 weeks as a ballpark framework for how long they'd known each other, Kessinger corrects him again, saying softly that they hadn't known each other that long. She minimizes the time frame, literally, back down to 6 weeks. This is an asinine argument in itself because the two work together and clearly they worked together way longer than 8 weeks. Kessinger also complains that 6 weeks is a long time to have to think about what exactly was said between them. Instead of being forthcoming, about 15 minutes into the second interview, Kessinger's adamant that that was Two-Face Epilogue. It's the 9th book and the final book written in the Two-Face series. You will notice that for some peculiar reason, although the series is as another name, K9, like the K9 book series, for some reason Amazon seems to have struggled with I think the automatic numbering, the fact that this is book 9 and then it's the K9 series. For some reason it hasn't been added to the full series, and as a result I'm not sure whether everyone that have read the whole series are aware of Epilogue. In any event, Epilogue was written on it was published on July 15th 2019. It's one of the shorter books in the series at 161 pages. It really dealt with a lot of the more subtle areas of the Watts case, things that were buried or hidden in kind of in plain sight, just in the sense of one can not see the wood for the trees a lot in this case, and so by the time that we got to Epilogue, we had a lot of perspective on a lot of things that had happened. And so having become extremely familiar with the various interrogations, this is hours and hours of it. I think there are around about 7 hours of interrogations dealing with Watts. This is during the first confession, and about the same amount with Kessinger, and then another 5 hours in terms of the second confession. So it's a lot to go through, and there were areas that were dealt with, how can I put it, the critical areas were dealt with, but there were other areas of subtlety that were also important to highlight, and so this book kind of dealt with that, and kind of the turning points in some of the interrogations. What was very difficult during the first analysis of the transcripts was to be certain to say, well, this was a juncture moment, this was a critical hinge in the investigation, in the interrogation, that then changed the course of what followed. It was very difficult when going through it at the time to find those things, because the interrogations were so messy, because the discussions were quite random, and you can anticipate in a situation where this is with regards to the interviews with Kessinger and also the interrogation with Watts. You're kind of having quite a few bites at the cherry from different sort of angles. They're not going through it in one straightforward chronological narrative. They go through it, then they kind of reach an impasse, and then they go through it again, and then they go through it again. So you kind of have quite a few shortish circuits of the narrative, and then you have quite a lot of little fragments all over the place. And so it's a challenge for the narrator to see those for what they are, and then to kind of assemble it into kind of assemble the little toppings and the little fragments and the quadrants, and put it together as a cohesive pizza, and then to see what the pizza actually is. What kind of pizza is it? how big is it, and what flavor is it, and all that kind of thing. In terms of the 8 weeks that I referred to earlier, and Kessinger saying that, she was saying it's not going to happen in quite a firm, stern way. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to be able to tell you what's told me over the past weeks. Given what we know now, can you see how that's got quite a strange significance? Because if you think of it in a logical way, forget about the fact that there were murders and so on. Just in a very logical way, if the police came to you and asked you, can you say what someone you were in love with said over the past few weeks? It wouldn't be that difficult. All you would need to do is give them your phone. It would be as simple as that. Even without your phone, you would probably be able to remember a few standout scenarios that happened between, you can just think of the significant other in your life right now, or just someone that you have quite a lot of interaction with, more than anyone else right now. And if you go back a couple of weeks, you can easily think about sort of standout moments that have happened, either arguments or good moments or funny moments or whatever. And it wouldn't be that difficult to kind of provide a couple of anecdotes just to illustrate that. And yet Kessinger is saying here it's not going to happen. And that in itself is kind of interesting. And when you sort of take everything that we know about this case, you can sort of read between the lines and see what was really going on here. Kessinger knew that she would be in a conundrum, to put it mildly, if the exact context, the exact communications between her and Watts, if other people got hold of them, and that is now the case. I think if you had to excise that from the Chris Watts narrative, it would lose a lot of its power and authenticity. I think people love to hate Nichol Kessinger, and people people can sort of almost intuitively feel the dynamics pulling Chris Watts away through his relationship with her. And so she provides almost a kind of a reality, a kind of a context that where I wouldn't say things make sense, but where things fit somewhat, where you can see how and why this crime took place to an extent. It's obviously not answered to satisfaction just through Kessinger, but certainly a lot is. And even in the sentencing hearing, the district attorney said, he was saying why, and then he sort of said, it's not that difficult to see. The defendant wanted another life. He wanted and to have this other life with his mistress. He needed to get rid of the old life. He wanted a new life, and he wanted to get rid of the old life. And so even in his very vanilla summary, he acknowledges Kessinger as a vital part of it. And this is why her absence and her silence is probably giving so much. There's a certain amount that's disclosed through the texts that have been rescued from Chris Watts. There's a certain amount that's there, and there's a very, very small amount that's been rescued from her. but now more information has been coming out from Watts himself. Even so, it's still a small amount, and what that has then left is, it's been left to the imagination, I guess, of the YouTubers to fill in the gaps, and of, you know, a real army of, it seems like a real army of especially women out there who are projecting their own, maybe it's experience with, you know, having been cheated on, having experienced a third party maybe steal away their partners or something like that. But there's a lot of vitriol and vehemence to Kessinger as the other woman, and what you don't hear, and I can understand why, but I think it needs to be acknowledged, what you don't hear is the people who have cheated on other people. And let's face it, in America the divorce rate's really high. Infidelities happens all the time, but you don't really, in this particular case, the Watts case, you don't hear people saying, well, you know, I committed adultery and I understand Nichol Kessinger, or I was very you know, desperate to get married, and I cheated with a married man. You don't hear those people talking because it's simply taboo. You know, it's taboo to say that's the case. And it's kind of ironic because we live in a openly sexual society. You know, I was just in a discussion with someone, having put up that YouTube video on Amanda Knox, where there's been this narrative about how did she get the name Foxy Noxy, right? And within that context, you have the narrative changing from, at the time when she committed the crime, she was supposedly very promiscuous, and it raised eyebrows. And today that narrative's changed to, so what if she was very sexual? You know, is that a crime? Is it a crime to be openly sexual? And I don't want to go into the merits of the Amanda Knox case, but there definitely is a sort of almost a hypocrisy in terms of how you deal with the sex narrative in terms of true crime. In Amanda Knox's case, she that's part of her being a victim, right? In the Chris Watts case, nobody thinks of Nichol Kessinger as a victim. And equally, and I mean, I'm going to do an episode about that. Is Nichol Kessinger the victim of a cruel and vindictive society, or is it just desserts? And I know a lot of people will say just desserts, but if you consider this from the perspective of any other affair, where things, you know, where someone has an affair and nobody gets killed, people tend to walk away from those affairs unscathed. In other words, you don't have society condemning you until kingdom come, and losing your job and losing your home and becoming a pariah just because you had an affair. So when you add the murders, then does that then automatically do you then become some kind of other person? So what I'm trying to get at is, in a situation where there's an affair, and you bring it into the true crime scenario, did that person know that this person was going to commit this crime? Nobody did. I mean, everyone from Chris Watts' parents to Shanann's parents to Shanann to Shanann's friends to Kessinger, even to law enforcement, even to the FBI, after they knew what had happened, they said, "Well, you seem like a really nice guy." So the whole argument for how this happened, and then putting it all onto Kessinger, seems a bit unfair. I don't think there's no truth in it. I think she did certainly have a strong hold on him, but people are taking it to the point where they're saying that she was literally an accessory in the sense that she was there, she planned it, she pushed him to do it, and all this kind of thing. And that is where I think minds are addled and emotions are getting the better of people, and that's not true crime rocket science. And I really wish more people who are doing that would read the Two-Face series, because you can clearly see how just within the confines of the marriage, Watts felt he was trapped, and because of his personality, it's not just his personality, but because of his personality and Shanann's and the lock-in of the pregnancy, there you had already a very fraught situation, and the narratives show that very well. Obviously there is a narrative to say, you know, what was the influence of this relationship? Was it a very strong, compelling, addictive thing? Yes, it was. But don't make that the focus of it. The focus is Chris Watts. The focus is what he was thinking, what he was doing, and all that kind of thing. I just want to address one additional thing. You know, some people have pointed to the ping from Nichol Kessinger's cell phone, and people have identified this ping as a sort of factual artifact, some kind of factual thing that is linking Kessinger to almost geographically to the scene of the crime. First of all, it's not a ping. It is Kessinger receiving a call, or sorry, I think it's actually her making a call. It's not incoming. Kessinger making a call, and the call is made at looks like 6:16 a.m. That's on August 13. And then when she makes that call, it comes off a tower that is fairly close to the Watts home. That call at 6:16 is already around about 30 minutes after Chris Watts left the home. 30 minutes. And it also just happens to be the same time that Kessinger would have gone to work as per normal. I mean, Watts was going to work as per normal, and so he left slightly earlier than normal because he was going to Roggan. But Kessinger was leaving kind of at the standard time, and so she made this call probably while she was in transit. It's really not it's not a smoking gun that she was anywhere. And if you look at the route that Kessinger would take from North Glen to Platteville, where she worked, Frederick is sort of between North Glen and Platteville, slightly to the west, but basically in the same line. And one can imagine if she was halfway to work and she made a call, it would go off that same tower. So that is not convincing evidence from a true crime perspective. An eyewitness would be, and 6:16 a.m. is the time a lot of people would have been awake. So why didn't they see anything or see anyone? So it's that kind of thing that people need to that really does need to be addressed. And then coming back to the merits of the excerpt that I've read in terms of epilogue. If you take that statement that it's not going to happen, I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to be able to tell you what we spoke about over the past, not 8 weeks, 6 weeks. And then you see that there was actually a 111-minute discussion between Kessinger and Watts on the night of the murders, on August 12th. 111 minutes, and Kessinger's already saying on August 16th, which is just 4 short days later, I'm not going to be able to tell you exactly what I said. I don't remember what I said weeks and weeks ago. Okay, well, what about the last thing that you said to him? What about what you said to him on Sunday? And that's certainly an area of concern. And but that is why this chapter, the second chapter, I didn't read the entire second chapter, but it addresses some of the resistance, reluctance, obstinacy, and caution that Kessinger was feeling, why she wouldn't want to say certain things. And I know a lot of people don't want to do it, but you've in a way got to put yourself in her shoes. You know, there's the right thing to do, and then there's also the best thing to do. And sometimes the right thing and what's best, one must decide, well, what's right for me and what's best for me. And I know that people will be happy to prescribe this to other people, but if you had sent naked pictures of yourself and you had had very intimate relations with someone and sent very sort of graphic, exchanges, would you want the whole world to know about it? If that's true, well then, you know, email your a local reporter compromising pictures of yourself and do that, you know, if you feel comfortable with that. Most people don't. Most people may have these encounters with people and they don't want the whole world to know about it, and they don't want it to be dissected by people. And let's face it, at the end of the day, Kessinger was trying to keep her job, and she failed. She didn't keep her job. She has more than likely not only lost her job but also lost her home. Goodness knows what's happened to her friendships, and whether she's been able to have any other relationships. I know people don't really care about that, but you know, if you take it in terms of the fact that Kessinger hasn't been found guilty of any crime, she's been severely sentenced by the public, and that's something that I think also needs to be addressed. And there's some people who are cynically trying to profit from a kind of ongoing witch hunt and an ongoing smear thing. They're trying to enrich themselves at the expense of Kessinger. Not because I think that they truly believe Kessinger's involved, but that they want to believe it. And this is going on and on and on on YouTube, and if you are part of that, then you are part of that, and it's worrying. It's certainly worrying. You know, if this is the story about the destruction of 3 human beings, then and it's something that you feel very strongly about, then the tragedy is going on with another person who's being actively destroyed. You know, you've got Chris Watts in jail, and he deserves to be there, but it's the public that have put Nichol Kessinger in a prison of I want to say their own making, but I would even, you know, it's that is an ongoing thing. So a couple of other aspects that I addressed in Epilogue were the resources used in the Chris Watts case. There were really an incredible amount of resources used from the FBI, far more agents than people are generally aware of. You've got to go through the discovery to literally count the various agents. There are those that we're very familiar with, but there were very many working behind the scenes as well. There were CBI agents that we're aware of, but there were also very many doing other work related to this case as well. You know, it's almost like in a movie you sort of see the actors, and then there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of names in the credits afterwards. That's kind of how that the resources sort of reads. It's just literally reams and reams of names. When we deal with the police department, it's not just Frederick Police Department, it's several. It's not just one or two, it's quite a few police departments. In fact, the drone footage, I think was shot by someone either from Firestone or is it Dracamo? But you had quite a few police departments involved as well. Epilogue also deals with evidence, especially the hyoid bone, and that's an aspect that raises a lot of troubling questions about what actually happened in this crime, because the injuries sustained by all three victims don't correspond to the typical injuries in strangling victims. In Cece they're completely missing, in Bella they are mostly missing, and in Shanann there are no defensive injuries. So what happened? And then there's a section that deals with the characters in this case, and trying to see these people just from a different angle. And I know there were quite a few people who don't like that they don't like looking at things from a different angle. But this narrative is for that. It's after, you can imagine, after writing 8 narratives, Epilogue was about trying to see everything from a kind of a global perspective, but also from a perspective where we have context for everything, and where it starts making sense. And I think one of the most powerful chapters in Epilogue was workplace vibe. Sorry, it's not. It's a section, workplace vibe, and that is where I really went into the, again, aspects that haven't been acknowledged thus far in the narrative, which is, what was it like to work in Platteville? What was it like being Chris Watts with a lot of male co-workers? What was it like being Kessinger in a male-dominated environment? You know, were there wolf whistles? Were the colleagues aware that something was going on? Were they did they sort of egg Watts on? What was sort of going on? You know, was there some kind of gossip going on? What did they think about the fact that Chris Watts is married? Did they, you know, that, and I think that's a discussion that's completely missing thus far. So that was a very interesting section to go through, and there I also dipped into some of the audio of the co-workers to get a sense of who these people are, and what it was like, you know, a day in the life of going to work, if you were Kessinger or Watts or one of his colleagues. Just finding that fragment and getting that perspective on the crime, and then the narrative ends off with a final reimagining of the crime on Monday morning, August 13th. So yeah, so Epilogue wrapped up the Two-Face series, and it did what it was supposed to do. It provided real-time analysis at the time, and I do think it was the most effective at interrogating this case with what was known at the time. I don't think there's anyone else that did as thorough a job researching, analyzing, intuiting, and gaining insight than through these 9 narratives. There's another book coming along that claims to be a major account. I really don't think that there's a more definitive account than all of these books as a whole of the Chris Watts case, and I think many of these books individually are definitive in terms of their assessment of the case. And this brings us then to the next series, which is the Silver Fox series. The Silver Fox series, just by the nature of the Chris Watts case now, will not be, there won't be as many books. There won't be as regular books coming out. So, you're not going to get one book a month, or one, it's certainly going to be staggered. There might be one book every 3 or 4 months. And there will only be a book when there's something to deal with, something to counter, some new information. At this point, there will be a trilogy, starting with Silver Fox, the Third Confession. Then there will be Wedded Husband, Wedded Wife, and the anticipated finale will be a book called Post-Truth, all in the Silver Fox trilogy. I anticipate that this trilogy will be written over the course of around about 8 months. But yeah, in terms of Silver Fox, it's a longer book than I intended, but still quite a short book. Silver Fox deals specifically with Chris Watts. It doesn't deal much with Shanann, doesn't deal much with Nichol Kessinger, but it does deal with the evidence and something that True Crime Rocket Science has been on top of since day one, which is the overdose theory, and the theory that the children were overdosed with oxycodone. It's something that we suspected from the very first Two-Face narrative, and we're now getting reinforcement with that. But once again, it's finding a way to weave our way through the complicated web, not getting stuck to the strands that are there, but finding our way to the center of the maelstrom without getting stuck. And we do that by understanding how Chris Watts thinks, by figuring out how he lies, and by figuring out what the misdirections are pointing us away from. So I'll be giving a book away. Silver Fox has been published. I'll be giving away one copy, and I'll be giving it to someone who can answer the following question. In the excerpt provided, what did Nichol Kessinger describe Chris Watts as? And those who leave an answer, please indicate whether you have a Kindle or not. I won't obviously be giving this book to people who don't have a Kindle and don't know how it works. In order to read a Kindle book, you don't need a Kindle. You just download the app, but you will need an account on Amazon. So if you leave an answer, please just confirm that you do have a Kindle. Obviously, if you claim your prize and you haven't downloaded the app, you won't be able to read it. So this is really for people who know True Crime Rocket Science and have read the books before, and who have a Kindle, and who have downloaded the app. So voracious readers and people who are familiar and clued up with true crime. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing this journey with you with the Silver Fox trilogy.